Hello, Garland Nixon here, and it's Tuesday morning. We're hanging out with JOTI BRAR, and we've got one or two things I think Jody's going to need to enlighten us about. Let's talk. All right, before we get going, let me show everyone. This is a meme that I made up. Nicknames for neocon, nicknames for imperialism. I didn't know what word to come with, but I decided to go with neocon because not everybody would be so aware of what imperialism means. MAGA, I'm with her, hope and change. You just get, people are shocked that they get the same thing over and over and over. So here we sit in a day when, in a way, this is going to sound, and I've heard people from the global South say we like Trump because he doesn't do the liberal interventionist stuff. He does. We're there to bring democracy, and we're here to do all these good things. We're standing up for justice and peace and all that. He just comes up and says, we're taking the oil. I think he infuriates the liberal interventionists because they've come up with this, discussion that has to do with a right to invade a country because you're bringing democracy, stopping a dictator, whatever the case may be. And Trump just says, nah, I'm going to be pretty straightforward about it. This is imperialism. And I might add this. What's interesting is, of all people, the British are like, well, I guess it's okay, but whatever you do, don't say anything about it in the BBC. Let's call it seized. We don't want to use words like kidnap. Anyway, your thoughts on all of this, JOTI BRAR?
Thanks, Garland. I think you're absolutely right. We always said, my party, that Donald Trump was the best possible face for US imperialism, precisely because he represents it as it really is, not as it pretends to be. Now, for about more than 100 years, US imperialism acted under the cover of being an anti-colonial power, right? They said, we're not like old Europe. Remember those exploiters? We're here to help you get free of those awful exploiters. And then they set up a system of mainly neo-colonialism. It's not to say the USA doesn't have some direct colonies. It's never admitted that that's what it has, right? It's got several, but it doesn't admit that it has. It always sets up some kind of home rule, some kind of democratic system over which it just helpfully presides. But it has set up an entire myth about itself being, a partner for democracy, a partner for trade, a partner for peace, blah, blah, blah. And with the Trump style of administration of imperialism, you get mask off. But Trump himself, Trump couldn't have happened before we got to this period of the decline and fall of US imperialism. He's a symptom of the decay, the inability to carry on in the same old way, the imperialist crisis that's gripped the entire system. But he's also an accelerant in many ways. When you look at this latest act of barefaced piracy without the shred of an attempt to conjure up a legal justification, right? Or an international consensus, not even a coalition of the willing, just like we're doing it, we've done it.
I don't know if to add this to what you're saying, I'll make this quick. They said that Maduro is running a drug cartel, and they brought him in and they immediately said, yeah, we're dropping that charge because really that's not a drug cartel. It doesn't exist. So they're just like, okay, he's running a drug cartel. You got him? Yeah, there's no drug cartel. Never was.
So anyone who's paying attention for more than 5 seconds and doesn't have the mind of a goldfish will see the inconsistency there, won't they? But so my point was really that with this approach to projecting power, without even pretending to put together a narrative or a process, without even going through the motions of consulting Congress, of doing the things that the US Constitution says you're supposed to do before you launch a war, or that the international system says no UN security debate or resolution, or even attempt to push it through some bit of the United Nations. And we know that the United Nations fundamentally is an instrument of US foreign policy, but even, bypassing all those channels and just directly carrying out an operation of barefaced piracy like this, it's one of the highest crimes in international law, right? This naked type of aggression. To conduct its operations in such a way, they are shredding the last vestiges of legitimacy of the alleged international system, international law, the United Nations system, the rules-based order, all the various ways they have of referring to it, that we're supposed to believe in. And not just we, the people at home, but all of the countries and peoples around the world. Haven't we been brought up being told, if there's a problem with the way some member of the ruling class or some government of the ruling class acts, you go to the law in your own country, the law internationally. These are your places of redress. You go to parliament, and then you go to the law, and you use the court, use the legal system, because the legal system is neutral and above everybody, and everybody respects the law, and everybody respects international law. And this is the last bit of tearing up of that mirage, which has, let's not forget, been very important to the international image of US imperialism, that there is such a thing as international law and that they abide by it and uphold it, right? And now they're making it absolutely clear. I think it was Marco Rubio said, basically, what UN, who cares what the UN thinks, right? Just the other day. So they're saying that, they're telling the rest of the world what to think. And that is only going to accelerate the moves to developing alternative systems that bypass the USA, economic systems, military alliances, but also diplomatic systems for maintaining some kind of international peace and security, are just going to have to bypass the USA. It was interesting, last year, China launched this global, what did they call it? Global something initiative that was about
global governing
governance. Thank you. Yes. The Global Governance Initiative. I knew it had another G in it. Global Governance Initiative. Now, when they were launching it, they specifically said, we're not trying to bypass the UN. We support the reform of the UN based on the UN Charter, i.e. the principles of sovereignty and dignity. But if the UN is impossible to use for those mechanisms, the rest of the world is starting to realize that if they believe in sovereignty of nations, they're going to have to set up structures outside the USA in order to push forward those aims. And I think, when we saw Keir Starmer being asked about, isn't this illegal, and the way that he evaded the question and squirmed underneath it, you could see two things. Number one, the junior imperialist powers are not going to be able openly to go against this because they have to be all in with the USA, otherwise they can't survive. But they understand, and I think there's a big section of the ruling class inside the USA that also understands that being so brazen and blatant in ripping up international law doesn't serve the stability of ruling class imperialist interests. They're all worried. What is this going to mean? Now, they say things like, oh, now you're empowering other people to also break the law, by which they mean you're telling Russia and China that they just need to recognize we live in a world of might is right and give up on trying to use the United Nations or any other mechanism. And of course, that's very worrying for the thinking sections of the imperialist ruling class. And they're also, I think, very worried, Garland, about their own deep crisis of legitimacy, because that's been getting worse and worse. And this is going to put just a massive hammer blow into that already, massively fractured situation. And the level of distrust, cynicism, and then unrest as a result, as life gets worse for the people at home, and they have less and less faith that the people in charge of them have their interests or anybody's interests apart from those of monopoly capital at heart.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that yes, I would agree with everything you said. And I'll say this, and this is a comparison, see what you think of it. I think that a few weeks ago that the Europeans basically did the same thing. And here's what I mean. Jacques Beau. I think it's the same thing in a way of speaking, in that they said, look, he can't do anything. He's completely sanctioned. He is what we did to Venezuela, right? They sanctioned away 99% of their revenue, and then said, look at them, they can't manage the other 1%. Why? They're terrible with their money, right? And you said, and there's no recourse for them. They can't go to the UN. There's nothing they can do. We have the authority to do it, so we're going to make them starve. What happened with Jacques Beau? The EU said, oh, it's not a legal thing, because if it was, he'd be able to go to court and to challenge it. He has no way to, there is no UN for him. There is no nothing. This is a political thing. It is not punishment. However, if you look in Black's Law Dictionary, it meets the standards. There are 3 standards to meet for punishment. It meets every one of them. So they said it's not punishment, because we said it's not punishment, even though it means it's the exact same thing. It's the imperialists saying we can do anything we want to. Jacques Beau is Maduro. They kidnapped him. He can't have food. He can't do anything. They kidnapped Jacques Beau and in complete contraindication to all law, and just said we can do it because we can do it, and we're not listening. Nobody can stop us, and he can't push back. To me, they did the same thing, and they woke up and they saw Donald Trump did it, and they're like, yeah, but you're supposed to say it's corrective action. Come on. You're supposed to like write something that sounds good, that he did something bad. You didn't even do that.
I feel like the difference, Garland, is scale and publicity level, because you're right. All the Western governments are ripping up the norms and the laws that they claim to uphold, because they are in a desperate situation, and they need these tools of repression to try to keep the lid on discontent and anti-war and anti-imperialist and especially anti-genocide sentiment that all of those things are kind of coalescing into in the Palestine movement, pro-Palestine movement. But they're doing those things quietly, and they're doing them in little corners at the edge of the movement that they hope most people won't be aware of. They don't get maximum publicity, these actions, or the publicity they get, the masses don't see them or don't appreciate what they mean, because they don't know the person involved. But the USA, with this kidnapping operation, they made maximum publicity on the global stage. It's everywhere. Nobody can escape knowing that they've done this. Right. So it's really, really, really in your face, isn't it? And I think none of these things, whether it's the sanctioning of Graham Phillips or Jacques Beau or the kidnapping of President Maduro and his wife, none of these things are signs of strength. You know, I was watching an analyst, I can't remember his name, I'm sorry. And but he reminded me, because I think we talked about this once before, this thing of, you know, they used to have this expression, speak softly and carry a big stick, right? And this used to be the approach of the imperialists when they were strong and confident. As they get weaker, as their big stick has been exposed as not as strong as he thought it was, they're failing in Ukraine, their economic power is waning, their military power is waning, their industrial might is waning, their diplomatic clout is waning, the petrodollar is imploding. As all these things are happening, they are shouting more and more about how strong they are. When they were really strong, they didn't have to do that. Everybody knew, right? They kept the gun behind their back while they talked very nicely to you, but you knew it was there. Right now, they have to wave the gun in your face to try to make you be scared. And I think that's something, you know, on the one hand, we shouldn't dismiss the power of the imperialists. Clearly, they're very powerful. Clearly, the USA has a huge military machine. But what they're trying to convince us of is that they remain invincible and hegemonic. And neither of those things are true anymore. In fact, the US myth of invincibility was actually broken by the Korean War. And it's been repeatedly broken since then. And in that time, the USA peaked in terms of its strength and has been massively declining since the late 70s in terms of its economic and military power. And a lot of what we thought we knew about the US's power turned out to be a lot of smoke and mirrors, which experience, particularly the experience of the operation in Ukraine, NATO putting everything they had into that and failing, the experience of their attempts to crush all resistance in the Middle East and failing, completely failing, Garland, and all of this is showing the world, failing to crush the Sahel. I mean, they keep trying in all these places, right? They keep trying against Venezuela. But one point I think we really have to be clear on is, yes, they launched a successful bandit raid with an armada that's costing them billions to maintain. They have successfully murdered about 100 fishermen and kidnapped a president and assassinated his bodyguard, right? Do you know what they haven't done? Taken over Venezuela, right? The Western media talks as if that's job done. This is absolute nonsense. There's a whole lot of stuff circulating including in the left, on social media, discussing how, who sold Maduro out and how, the whole thing's imploding and Venezuela's going to come down and it's a domino. And it's all a psychological operation aimed at making us believe that the USA is invincible and can do anything it wants anywhere. But the truth is they can't. They know they can't put boots on the ground in Venezuela. Life in Venezuela is continuing. The government in Venezuela is continuing. The military in Venezuela is still in place securely. There has been no, if they had really been able to turn a whole load of the high up members of the military in Venezuela, they'd be parading them right now as the alternative government. They're not, because they haven't got them. They may have had one or two low-level informers, or they may have just been very good at hacking into everybody's phones. I mean, everybody in Latin America uses WhatsApp, right, for a start. And they've got all of this spying equipment. It's very clear that they were able to jam a lot of signals that stopped military equipment working for a certain number of hours, and that they had a blackout in bits of Caracas just for that period. So, they put all this effort into this big operation. They managed to be successful in one thing, but in the grand scheme of things, that, all this talk about what they're going to do with Venezuela's oil and how the markets feel about it, it's a bit like the way that the Americans and the Europeans are busy debating the terms of the end of the war in Ukraine, isn't it? It's like, well, it's got nothing to do with reality. Reality is over here. And if you're not talking to Russia and taking on board what they will accept in terms of a peace deal, there's no peace deal. And what you've negotiated amongst yourselves is theatre for the press and for the populations at home to make it look like you are in charge of this thing, but you're not.
Look, you know what? As they say, you are preaching to the converted when it comes to me. This is what I've been saying. Here's a great article called Venezuela's Revolution Still Stands. It's at peoplesdispatch.org. Debunking Trump's PSYOP in the aftermath of the illegal U.S. operation against Venezuela. A deliberate misinformation campaign has been waged to sow doubt about the survival of the country's revolution. They came out, as always, and they said, oh, Dulce Rodriguez, we talked to her and she's going along with everything that we want and she's just a puppet, basically. And she's like, no, that's not true. Yes, we've got all of these people in charge, and we find out their decapitation strike didn't decapitate anybody, every single person. They kidnapped one person. That's what they were able to do, kidnap. Well, yeah, that's what I mean. Two people. I mean, one politician and his wife, which is horrible, but two people, okay? But one politician they were able to, and the government hasn't fallen. The people are on the street, and all of these people, it's the same. See, I'm with you. I've been saying the same thing. People have been saying, well, they take the oil, they're going to do this with the silver, they're going to do that. I'm like, wait a minute. I've been there. I talked to these people.
Yeah.
They will fight. You're going to have to go in and take every inch inch by inch, ground by ground. Donald Trump is in the same position that he was in the day before. They have a new. So what are you going to do? Well, we're going to go in and kidnap the next person. And then the next, you can't send boots in. They can't take this stuff. And I've just been saying, well, people will find out. It will take them a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two to figure out what I already know because I've been there. It's a fraud. It's what Trump does. He has a press conference and he makes a big to-do, his mission accomplished moment. We've done that. We've defeated. We've done this. And I'm like, no, you really haven't. The whole thing's a fraud. And how long is it going to be before all of these prognosticators on YouTube are talking about this great victory that this military power, they took everything and now they're going to run the country. Trump's saying, Dulce Rodriguez is on a short leash. She better make the right decisions. Well, wait a minute. If you run the country, you already determined what decisions. What do you think she has to, or else? I thought you already had taken over the country. They got nothing.
Totally. Absolutely agree with you, Garland. And I think there's a very important lesson for people who genuinely are on the side of anti-imperialism, who want to support the sovereign peoples of the world, that they've got to stop joining in with these PSYOP campaigns. They've got, like, if you don't know for sure something's true, stop speculating in public about it. Just wait. Like, what does it hurt you to wait 1, 2, 3, 4 days, a week, a month? It doesn't hurt you, right? This need to act as if you know when you don't. Now, you know, if I turn out to be wrong and the government of Venezuela falls next week, okay, it fell. But I'm not going to help it fall. I'm not going to help demoralize all the forces that need to be rallying in its support by making them feel that it's a fait accompli, that it's already happened. And I'm not going to help the USA and the imperialists promote this idea that a country and a whole system stands or falls with one person. You know, the Bolivarian process has been ongoing for 26 years. Nicolas Maduro's career as the head of state for Venezuela was a product of that system. He was a trade union leader, right? When Hugo Chavez came to power, and he became part of that movement, the Chavismo movement, as a result of his loyalty to that project, not because you know, he's just some big man gangster. I have no idea if I'm still alive. Might have to...
Drop fell out.
We'll not take that personally.
Is it back on? Is my internet on? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, my internet went out for a second and I went back in and my doggone router had fallen off. I had a little table had fallen off and was laying there. So I got my router back on. So at any rate, sorry about that, Jody.
No worries.
Can we continue?
I can't remember where we were.
Oh, well, so the bottom line is this. I think what we're looking at also is a building crisis of legitimacy internally, because the American people don't know what to make of it. One, you know, if you look at it, a few minutes ago, I put up, and I'll have to probably cut this thing and redo it, but I put up this meme that I think at the very beginning. Sorry about that, everyone. I guess we'll hope for the best here, but we're rolling now. And this meme, and the meme, nicknames for neocon, right? I'm with her, that was Hillary. Hope and change, MAGA. So all people get, you know, I left out Build Back Better, but all people get every 4 years is some kind of a slogan, some kind of a catchy hook. I'm with her, whatever, but it's never substantive. And ultimately, what they, you know, they're finding out is no matter what, you know, I'll give it to Hillary Clinton. She didn't pretend to be a dove. But Obama came in, we're going to do things differently now. And I get what was it? The thing that's Trump's trying to get, a Nobel Peace Prize. He got it before he even got to office. That should have been a hint. Trump comes in, hey, he got a Nobel Peace Prize. I think they should give it to Trump, particularly now. I think it's a perfect time for them to give the Nobel Peace Prize to Trump, because he, in doing this, has demonstrated that he's earned what this system gives you. and that's a Nobel Peace Prize for war. But I think this will help to educate people in the United States, those who are willing to be educated, about the reality of this illusion of democracy, this illusion that they've got some kind of a political force that is going to convince, that's going to put the right person in. Trump, Biden, Hillary, whoever, Obama, put the right person in, and that person is going to adjust the machine. And really, the person's just an actor, a fraudulent actor.
That's totally right, Garland. You know, there's that old joke, isn't there? Whoever you vote for, the ruling class wins. And that's exactly right. And we have to, as you say, learn that lesson. It's like been taught to us painfully in so many ways, so many times. We need to get the message. This system, this state machinery, this type of democracy, which is democracy for the super rich and not for you, doesn't work for the mass of the people. It is not made to work for the mass of the people, and you can't reform it or vote the right people in to make it work for you. You have to recognize, as a member of the masses, as a member of the working people, your interest is in replacing this system of capitalism, which has gone as far as it can. What you're looking at now is how capitalism gets when it's reached the end of the line, right? This is capitalism turned into decaying imperialism. There is no way back from here to a nice version of capitalism that actually never existed and is not capable of existing. Capitalism is an inherently unequal system that breeds poverty and violence. And imperialism is capitalism on steroids gone global. And today, after 150 years of imperialism, this is the final decaying period. And this is what it looks like, people. So we have to learn the lesson that capitalism has as a system, its future is in the past. It has nothing to offer humanity. All of the things it did to develop the productive forces, it has done. What we need to develop those productive forces more in the future is socialism. It's the working class in control of the means of production with a planned economy, so we can raise the standard of living for everybody, expand production for the benefit of humanity without destroying the planet, without going to war, and without creating gross inequalities. In fact, abolishing exploitation, abolishing war, abolishing inequality. So all of these things, these are the lessons that we're being taught. I would encourage everybody to read Lenin's State and Revolution. It really lays all this out, why it is that the state can't serve you. I might have sent you a copy of it, did I, Garland?
Yes, I think I do have a copy back there somewhere.
So I recommend that to people, to read that. But not only that, you know, you really need to make a deep study of Marxism, and you need to get organized in an organization that's going to work to bring this about. Because I think one of the other lessons we really have to learn, Garland, is that nobody is coming to save us if we don't organize ourselves to save ourselves, right? The imperialists, you know, on the one hand, we have to recognize they're not as strong as they pretend they are. And we talked about how a lot of this is a psychological operation and a projection of strength at a time when the system is actually weaker than it's been in a long time. It has many fractures, many problems. But really the crime in the current situation is how little the working class in the West are doing to use the situation of crisis for the ruling class, its economic crisis, military crisis, political crisis, to bring them down, right? That's our job. We're letting them ransack the world and run rampant and unleash terror and bombing campaigns and, you know, economic warfare all over the globe while we sit here and go, oh dear, that's not very nice, is it? You know, we need to demand that we have a mass movement in our country and a leadership of that movement that's actually prepared to act in our interests against the ruling class. We have this power that we're not using. And this is really the criminal aspect of the situation right now. There's a lot of people in the Western left space who right now are saying, why haven't Russia and China come in to fix this situation? Russia and China are doing more than any other country to undermine the stability and the strength of imperialism in today's world. But they're not going to come and liberate you. The other part of the job has to be done at home. You working class that live in Britain, you working class that live in USA, you working class that live in France and Germany, you have got to bring down the imperialists and dispossess them, dismantle their machinery of global looting yourselves. You've got to rebuild a genuine mass movement, a genuine trade union movement with leaders who aren't loyal to the imperialist ruling class, right? As long as we let people co-opt our movement who serve the imperialist system, it's not surprising that the movement has no teeth, is purely performative. The massive workers have no faith in it and don't join it. And so being on the left looks like some little activity for a small clique of people rather than a genuine mass movement to bring down capitalism and imperialism and build the movement for socialism.
You know, I have attributed the characteristics of this dying imperialism as that of a drowning man. You know, somebody that falls in the water and they're panicking and they're reaching in every direction and they're fighting and trying to grab anything they can to save themselves. But the more they fight, the faster they go down and drown, right? Everything that the imperialists do to try to save themselves only makes them go down faster. The stupidest thing they could have done is gone into Ukraine, because when they lose that, as Boris Johnson said, but when we lose this, that's the end of Western hegemony. Yeah, Boris Johnson, you're right. And it was your choice to do it. Now, here's the other part. We're going to dominate South America. Okay, so we're going to kidnap Maduro and his wife. Okay, you did that. But if you lose this one, which you will, and you don't have success, and Venezuela resist, which they will, and you don't get the oil and all of those things, which you won't, then you don't dominate. Then you say to all of South America, we're not powerful enough to dominate you. We tried it with Venezuela and they resisted. And what we found out is we can fly over and we can do technological cyber attacks and shut your electricity off for a couple of hours and do things, these little kinds of things like that. But we can't take the country because you're all walking around with AK-47s. And might I add, if he's a dictator, then why the hell would he give guns to his people? Because they'd all point them at him, right? If I'm a dictator, the last thing I'm going to do is arm my people because they hate me. They're all going to point them at me. He gave them guns because they know where to point them. And given the opportunity, they will do it. And this will, my prediction is, will be disastrous. And it won't mean that they takes out Latin America. It'll mean that once and for all, the people in South America figure out that they can't take it.
I think that's right, Garland. You know, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip, as they say. And that's true for all of us. The long-term picture, I think, is absolutely what you say. In the short term, is it possible for them to get some small victories in Latin America, as they have had some small victories in the Middle East? Yes, it is. Is it possible for the anti-imperialist camp to suffer defeats, temporary defeats? Yes, it is. In the long term, all they are doing, as you say, is revealing more clearly to the people everywhere what is really needed. I noticed that the Serbian former defense minister, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, but he was quoted in the TASS news agency as saying that what we're seeing with Venezuela is like a rerun or an attempted rerun of what was done to Yugoslavia in 1999, tried to destroy the country, kidnap the president, right? Put the president on a show trial. But he said, they tried to destroy my country. What they actually did was destroy international law. Well, that was the beginning of that process, and this is the end of it, right? You could see a kind of bookend. Now, one of those was far more successful in their eyes than the other. As you said, it's a kind of very pale imitation, isn't it? Because when it came to Yugoslavia, they got together a coalition of the willing. In fact, it was a NATO war, as I recall. So they had created this pretext. They got together a big coalition. They bombed the hell out of Yugoslavia. And they were able to present it as a big win. And they were able to ultimately to change the regime. They were able to decapitate the leadership. They put Slobodan Milosevic on a show trial, which they had to close down because it was getting embarrassing. And they had to murder him quietly out of the spotlight because he was exposing them and their lies. But that was the beginning of this process of ripping up any vestige, any shred of international law, because of course there was no justification at all for the war on Yugoslavia. They made up a new one. Do you remember that? Right to protect. So
Yeah.
it's not an aggressive war if we can tell you we're protecting somebody. But when it comes to Venezuela, they haven't even tried to resuscitate that justification because they know that they can't. In fact, it's been noticeable. I don't know if you've noticed this, Garland, but a lot of Western media are trying to make out that there's loads of Venezuelans celebrating this in Venezuela. But if you look at the pictures of celebrations, number one, they're like a group of 3 or 4 people with a flag. Number two, if you read the description in little letters, they're all outside Venezuela. It's like 3 people on a motorbike in Chile, right? And they find this picture, it's a big flag, and they put it up like people are celebrating. But these are not the Venezuelan people. In fact, the people who are in Venezuela will tell you that even members of the opposition or supporters of the opposition or people who won't vote for Maduro are out protesting right now because this is an attack on Venezuelan sovereignty. And the mass of the people, including people who don't support the government, understand that and are disgusted by it and are protesting it. So while it's possible that the USA continues with its charade of putting Nicolas Maduro on trial and pretending that they've won here, it's not impossible that, in fact, the pressure builds internationally to such a peak that they end up having to give him back in some kind of face-saving measure. Or maybe the next president gives him back so Donald Trump doesn't have to admit that this was all a charade, right? But, you know, none of this is written in stone right now. And really the job of the people around the world is, number one, we have to put on massive pressure to demand the release of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. This is absolutely outrageous violation of Venezuela's rights and of international law. But we also have to be building campaigns in our own countries to dismantle NATO, stop the war machine in its tracks in every one of the imperialist countries, to demand an international system that genuinely respects the sovereignty of nations. And if these countries, as they are constituted, are not capable of participating in such a system, we have to dismantle them and create new governments at home that will participate in such an international order, because it's not okay that our ruling classes go around the world like pirates and bandits, robbing everybody blind, subjecting everybody who stands up to them to strangulating sanctions, literally genocidally trying to throttle every country that wants to use its own resources for the benefit of its own people. What's the real crime that President Maduro's government, that Venezuela's people have committed in the eyes of the imperialists? They nationalized their oil wealth and used it for the benefit of the people. When the USA sanctioned them to try to force them and wanted to starve them into submission, starve the people into submission and sabotage their economy, so they had rampant inflation and incredible problems, what did the people of Venezuela do that was so outrageous? They survived and they worked out a way around. They diversified their economy so that now they feed themselves. And that's one lever the USA no longer has. It can't threaten to starve the people because they're feeding themselves, right? They withstood a decade of appalling genocidal abuse and said, no, we will protect our sovereignty and we'll protect our revolutionary process. What else have they done? They've been building a communal constitution as a parallel to the capitalist state machinery. They still have capitalism in Venezuela, but they're in very slowly, steadily trying to build the basis of a socialist state in Venezuela, i.e. they're shifting power towards the masses of the poor, peasants and workers. What else have they done? They have successfully set up a system. It took a long time, but it's now in place where they can sell their oil abroad with ships and payment mechanisms that bypass the USA entirely. Now, considering that when they started the sanctions, all of Venezuela's oil was basically, or almost all of it was going to the USA, and it was all being paid for in dollars, right? This is a massive achievement under sanctions that they've done that. This is a very, very serious crime as far as the USA is concerned. And of course, what they're showing to the world is the petrodollar is no longer invincible. And that is the massive crime, in particular at this moment, where their bet to resuscitate the system via the Ukraine war and a massive looting of Russia has failed, not just failed, but backfired and cost them instead of benefiting them. Now, Venezuela is proving that there's a way to have oil and bypass the USA when you trade it, when you produce it. They've signed a deal with China to develop their oil fields, to sell their oil. They've found ways to transport the oil out of the country using a fleet that doesn't touch any US systems. They've found payment mechanisms that the USA can't interfere with. All of that was incredibly hard to do, and they've done it. So as much as the USA wants the oil, and especially wants to prevent China being able to access the oil, because that's part of their bigger geostrategic plan of strangling China as a preparation, strangling them economically and resource-wise as a preparation for trying to bring it down through war. They are not succeeding. And they have not yet achieved what they said they're trying to achieve. They don't have Venezuela's oil yet. And there's a long way to go before they do have it.
What's interesting is I heard someone say recently, well, they haven't invaded or tried to do a regime change in North Korea. North Koreans got nukes and said, if you touch us, we'll blow you to smithereens. The North Koreans said, we will not negotiate with you. When Trump came back to office, he says, hey, I want to have a talk with you. And the North Koreans said, we got nothing to talk about. The Russians have realized the strength of the North Koreans and the value of them as allies, and they're arming North Korea to the teeth. And in my opinion, smaller countries around the world have to look at North Korea and say, man, they didn't get regime changed. They resisted. They did whatever they had. Now as soon as they, and what's interesting is Russia recognized that. And as soon as Russia was backed into a corner and had to go into their anti-imperialist mode, they had the legacy of the Soviet Union, but they looked over at North Korea and said, they are right on our backside and they're good allies and we can trust them. And they started arming North Korea to the teeth.
I think that's absolutely right, Gal. And now you've reminded me of the other part of what that former Serbian foreign minister said. So the first part was how they destroyed international law. The other part was, this shows the world that anybody who wants to pursue sovereignty must be armed with nuclear weapons. They must make it the cost too high for the Americans to attack them. And of course, the lesson of the DPRK is exactly that. Which is the country that survived as a sovereign and independent nation for the longest on planet Earth right now? It's North Korea. And North Korea, the DPRK, has made a point of having the highest level possible of weaponry, as well as the biggest possible level of military preparedness of its people, in order to let the imperialists know, if you try coming for us, the cost is going to be too high. And they haven't stopped. They didn't stop when it came to developing their weapons. They didn't just stop at being able to explode a nuclear bomb. They kept going till they had ballistic missiles that could carry bombs as far as the west coast of the USA. They need to make it clear, you start something here, it's going to come home to you. That's the only deterrence. It's the only language the imperialists understand. And we all have to recognize that and realize again that this system is so dangerous to humanity. We absolutely cannot just allow it to keep running rampant. We have to do something about it. Now, the other point you raised, I think, is one that is also important, Garland, this question of alliances and mutual defense treaties. If you look at Russia and China, both of them, and like the Soviet Union before it, in fact, they only have mutual defense treaties with people where they share a border. because they don't project military power all over the world. Right? They don't have the ability, they don't have the machinery, they don't have the desire. They will help with, I mean, Russia will help any government which asks it, and where they share common interests, i.e. anti-imperialist governments, they will help them with training and with equipment that to the best of their ability. But they don't have mutual defense treaties because they don't have the ability to sustain a war across international boundaries, except for where they share the boundary. So look today, who does Russia have that kind of military alliance with? It's Belarus on the west, and it's the DPRK in the far east. I'm sure if other countries bordering Russia today were to ask for such a treaty, Russia would happily agree. But you know, a lot of Westerners are busy saying, "Why isn't Russia saving? Why isn't China saving? You know, sending its military in to save because it's so important." It is very important, but Russia and China can't do more than they have been doing. In fact, one of the reasons Venezuela is being punished is precisely because it does have a military partnership with Russia, and it does have a trade economic partnership with China, and they're significant, and they're helping Venezuela strengthen its sovereignty. And that's part of why it's being attacked, because the USA is desperate to stop it becoming so sovereign that it can't be attacked, right? So it's very important, I think, to recognize those things. Even the Soviet Union, you know, when you look at Russia, okay, go back to the Soviet Union. Where did it fight wars after World War II? It fought wars for allies which were on its borders. It helped in the Korean War, although it had to do it in a low-key way. It sent in pilots, but it put them in Korean uniforms because it wasn't in a position to openly fight the USA. It did other things like putting a roadblock in Berlin that forced the Berlin airlift, which just diverted you know, aeroplanes away from the Korean War theater into Germany, right? So it had to act in a moderate way in that situation because of its own limitations. Not a massive imperialist power. It was strong, it was developing, but it was also, you know, recovering from World War II, and you know what a toll that took on the Soviet Union, and you know that the USA at that time was the absolutely preeminent military power on the planet. It later fought in Afghanistan. It was like the Ukraine war. In fact, it was or less than a Ukraine war. It was an operation. It wasn't a big war, but it was on the border and it was an ally, right? It wasn't the Russians, the Soviets never sent big forces around the world. They gave, you know, military support to national liberation movements in terms of, you know, you can come to our country and we'll help you train and we'll help you get weapons, but we can't come and fight your war for you, right? They weren't able to do that, and they didn't. So I think people have to be realistic about what's possible and what's really happening, in fact. And I saw this commentator, he made me laugh actually, because he was saying, you know, one of the reasons people fall for a lot of these narratives, but then also have unrealistic expectations of what the response should be or is because they basically spend their lives watching Netflix and they've got brain rot. They don't live in reality. They're watching the world like it's a kind of superhero, you know, Hollywood movie that, you know, you arrest, that it proves your total power because you arrested a president. And on the other hand, you know, it proves that Russia and China don't care or aren't doing anything if they didn't like respond like for like. But in reality, it's a response to what Russia and China are doing that we're seeing with the USA right now, flailing around, trying to bring down regimes in all directions. It's all in one way or another, in fact, aimed at Russia and China. Russia and China are busy building themselves up because they know they're the ultimate targets. And they know that their own people, as well as the rest of the world, needs them not to be defeated. The imperialists would like nothing better than for them to go outside their borders, be overextended, and be giving them the opportunity to use their narrative dominance to brand them as imperialist powers. But the truth is they're neither capable of acting like imperialists nor wanting to act like imperialists. And we should stop demanding that they do. They are, in fact, doing incredible things to help the oppressed world break free. It's not our job to sit on the sidelines and complain that they're not doing enough of it. It's our job to, as I said, dismantle imperialism, bring it down at home.
Yeah, I'm with you. A lot of the complaining is these people didn't punch back hard enough. But I would argue that anti-imperialist countries always have to look at the long picture, and they have to beat you slowly. They have to win. They have to outlast you. They have to, out jab you. They have to beat you by points at the end of the boxing match, not knock you out in the first round. It's always this, one of the things that I brought up, a lot of people talked about this, and their position was this was like Syria, and that Maduro was sold out, and now Syria's gone down. And I said, well, last time I checked, there's a lot going on in Syria right now, and there's a resistance that's building right now in Syria. So talk to me in 5 years about Syria and whether or not that was a good idea. I said, but we're only a couple of days out. We don't even know that he was sold out. Why would people speculate that he was sold out and then move forward as though it was factual, as though that one person speculates, I think he was sold out, and then everybody goes, yeah, he was sold out. That's built on speculation, number one. Number two, there's no long-term perspective. And I say, talk to me in 6 months. Talk to me in a year and tell me if we're pumping oil and digging silver out of the ground. I have a feeling we won't be. The anti-imperialism, like imperialism has to punch you and knock you out and and then show its dominance and get you down and then stand over your body and point to everyone and say, look what I did. Whereas the anti-imperialists just have to fight slowly. It's a different kind of fight. It's what the Vietnamese did. They beat you over a decade, and then you have to go home because they won. Did they take punishment? Yes. Did they lose people? Yes. And then they won the war. And I think what people don't understand the nature of fighting these powerful, reading General Giap's, what is it? People's Army, People's War. Reading that helps you to understand that if you think that when they punch, you have to fight their kind of fight. When they punch you hard, you have to punch back hard. You're going to lose because that's their fight. And I think what the Venezuelans are going to do is oftentimes when you're attacked by the imperialists, you win by not losing, if you know what I'm saying.
Totally. And in fact, the lessons from Vietnam in particular, when you think how poor the Vietnamese people were, I mean, it's very similar to Afghanistan, isn't it? They didn't have high technology weaponry. They fought because the masses of the people were with them. And that is another lesson of the modern era, that no matter how much bullying even the strongest imperial power does, in an era when the people have a national liberation consciousness, ultimately, you can't defeat them. Ultimately, you are going to be the one who has to end up walking away. But the damage they do, as you said, is enormous. I always think of, I think it was Paul Robeson's quote, who said, the people's will for liberation is stronger than atom bombs. And around the world, we see again and again that this is true. If you see videos or if you go to Venezuela, you will know that the mood of the popular masses in Venezuela is precisely that. Their will for liberation is stronger than atom bombs. And they know how strong they are because they have been overcoming incredible odds. It's a very different situation to Syria. The Syrian people had become very demoralized, and a mass of the people had left the country. Now, many people have been forced also to leave Venezuela, but many more have stayed. And the ones who've stayed, especially, the poor working class and peasant sector of the population, which is the masses, they are overwhelmingly united. They're united with the government. They're organized in mass organizations. They're organized with a project. They are participating in building a new society. It's very different than what we saw in Syria in the last decade. So they're not comparable situations, and they're armed, as you said, Garland. They are not demoralized. In fact, they feel stronger as a result of everything they have overcome. 5-10 years ago, you might have seen there was a basis for demoralization. But in fact, the things the Venezuelan people have overcome through their own efforts in unity with the military, in unity with the government, has made them feel strong and powerful, has given them organizational strength that you can't knock over with a propaganda campaign. You just can't.
Well, thank you very much, Jody. Well, for everyone, we did have a little period of time where, I don't know, must have had an earthquake. I went out. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I went in and somehow my whatchamacallit, my router head was laying on the floor and unplugged, so it fell off. That's the second time that happened. It happened last week when I was listening to Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson. I'm gonna have to Velcro that thing or something. At any rate, thank you very much, Jody Brar. Tell everybody where they can find all your good works.
Thanks, Garland. So I have a Telegram channel, just my name, JOTI BRAR, and my party has another one, The Communists, with an S, both on Telegram. You can find us on Twitter. Obviously, I'm not massively in favor of Twitter. I much prefer Telegram. Our website is thecommunists.org. Please go and subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our physical newspapers. Physical literature is always better. And you know, follow our output and get hold of our education program from there. You will find a link to it on our website and start to educate yourself in Marxism. And of course, if you go to YouTube, you can see a lot of our speeches and presentations there. It's Proletarian TV.
All right. I think I'm just going to take the video of this also. I'm going to leave this up for a while, but I'm going to take the video and just cut that 5 minutes out of it and rerun it. So I'll run this again as a live. People need to hear more. They can never hear enough Jody Brar. I always say, I know I can. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hey, thanks to everybody that donates to the channel. Of course, you also know that there's a P.O. box. So if you want to send me letters and cards and their manifestos, I guess, walking, all that kind of stuff. It's fun reading. So there's my P.O. box. But remember this, the most important thing that you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. And as I said, I'm going to cut the dead spot out of that. I'm going to Velcro my router to the table so that stops falling off. And then I'll run it again. Thanks a lot, everybody. We're out.